Yeah, you might be wondering how much in taxes the wealthiest Americans are avoiding. Well, it turns out a lot, because of course. Now, according to a new analysis by IRS researchers and academics published on Monday, the richest 1% of U.S. households is estimated to not report around 21% of their income. 21%. That's a lot of money. Now, they do so by, of course, using complex tax avoidance strategies that allow them to outmaneuver the IRS. Now, the IRS, of course, has reduced staff, which means they're not doing audits of rich people. In fact, they tend to be doing more audits of poor people because it's just easier. Great. So now this report comes from two IRS researchers, as well as a man named Daniel Reck out of the London School of Economics, as well as Emmanuel Saez of the University of California, Berkeley. The new paper finds that 6% of the richest households' unreported income correspond to undetected sophisticated evasion, such as offshoring, pass-through businesses, and other tax avoidance tactics. From a policy perspective, our results highlight that there is substantial evasion at the top, which requires administrative resources to detect and deter. We estimate that 36% of all federal income taxes unpaid are owed by the top 1%, and that collecting all unpaid federal income tax from this group would increase federal revenue by about $175 billion annually. So understand that every year, the top 1% is avoiding about $175 billion in taxes. That's a lot of money. Over 10 years, it comes to about $1.75 trillion. That's a lot of money the wealthy owe and are not paying. So, and of course, why would you pay it if you can get away with it? If the IRS is not going to come after you, if nobody's going to come after you, well, then why would you pay it? And technically, you'd be pretty dumb to do so. And so it makes sense that they would employ these strategies if there's no enforcement mechanism. Now, the paper continues by saying, there's been much discussion in the United States about the fact the audit rate at the top of the income distribution has declined. Our results suggest that such low audit rates are not optimal. Well, to be fair, rich people buy politicians and tell them to never audit rich people. No. Audits are for the poor. And that's it. In fact, ProPublica reported in 2019 that in recent years, the IRS has audited the poor at around the same rate as the richest Americans. Now, when the IRS actually conducts them, the random audits do not capture most tax evasion through offshore accounts and pass-through businesses, both of which are quantitatively important at the top. As a result, the paper's authors note, the incomes of the wealthiest people in the U.S. and the country's overall inequality are significantly underestimated. They've underestimated it. Now, right now, in this country, inequality is at dangerously high levels. That's a big problem. In fact, income inequality in the U.S. is actually one of the highest out of the G7 nations, according to data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's actually worse than the UK, but not by much, to be fair. The UK is they're not good. They're doing pretty bad too. But the US, we're number one. We're number one. And in 2018, households in the top fifth of earners with incomes of $130,001 or more that year brought in 52% of all U.S. income, more than the lower four-fifths combined, according to the Census Bureau. By 1968, by comparison, the top earning 20% of households brought in 43% of the nation's income, while those in the lower four income quintiles accounted for 56%. Interesting. So now understand that in capitalism, there's always going to be a certain level of inequality. But when it gets to such a high level, when it gets this bad, bad things tend to happen. Like, revolutions. Take France, for example. They kind of have a history of guillotining the rich when inequality gets to a point of where it's actually at in America right now. We are at the point of inequality where the French would have already cut off all the leaders, the heads of all the leaders. Okay, So now, of course, we're not doing that here in this country. I'm not even advocating for that. Of course not. What we should do is to do some redistributive policies, to avoid that. So speaking of that, Reck of the London School of Economics told the Wall Street Journal that what's needed is a broader strategy that involves increased scrutiny of pass-through businesses and investments into comprehensive audits that the IRS does in its global high wealth program. Basically, look, we should just make rich people actually pay what they owe. I mean, this isn't raising new taxes on the rich, which I'm in favor of. This is actually enforcing the laws that we have in the books and closing the loopholes. You remember, by the way, the one thing they kept saying when they were ramming through Donald Trump's tax cuts for the rich. You remember that, right? Oh, don't worry, we're going to close the loopholes. We're going to close the loopholes. In fact, they said that during the George W. Bush tax cuts as well. Don't worry, we're going to close the loopholes. They're going to actually end up paying more. We're just going to lower the rate, close the loopholes, and everything will be fine. See? And then, of course, what happened? Well, they just ended up paying less in taxes. And that's it. And so, obviously, it turned out being the opposite. In fact, the Trump tax cuts, in a way, have set it up to where it will raise people's taxes later. Now, for one, middle-class people got a small tax cut. Now, it's a temporary tax cut. It actually expires in about we got about like 7 years left. Corporations and the wealthy, however, they got a tax cut that is permanent. So, and if you live in California or New York, they actually effectively raised your taxes by getting rid of the SALT tax deduction. That is a state and local tax deduction, which, again, effectively raises your taxes in high-income areas. Now, that's, of course, meant to punish blue states by making them pay more into the system than they already do. In reality, of course, red state economies take more in federal benefits, and it's because they don't serve their own people. They cut taxes for their rich, their corporations, and let their people actually suffer. And so, as a result, a lot of these areas have much lower incomes and therefore don't actually pay into taxes because of such low income. So that's the result of this. All right. So what do we need to do? Well, the first thing is actually we should look into passing Ro Khanna's bill. So now Ro Khanna last month came out with the Stop Corporations and Higher Earnings from Avoiding Taxes and Enforce Rules Strictly Act. So now there's a reason that they come out with these really long, convoluted names, and it's because it spells cheaters, the Cheaters Act. I'll allow it. It's good. I like it. All right. Now, that legislation will provide the IRS about $100 billion in additional funding over a decade so the agency can more closely examine and crack down on tax evasion by the richest Americans. The bill would also invest in improvements to IRS technology, which is ancient, require audits of the richest individuals and corporations, and implement more strict income reporting requirements. All right. Hey, that's good. As long as they go and make sure that rich people pay their fair share of the taxes they actually owe, great. All right. Now, Khanna's office estimates the Cheaters Act would bring in about $1.2 trillion in federal revenue over the next 10 years. Here's what he said about it. In a statement, we know our tax system is broken, and it's long past time we start fixing it. The ultra-wealthy play by different rules than the rest of us. Now, in addition to Khanna's bill, I would add something that Elizabeth Warren has been pushing. I know, hiss, snake. It's a snake. Bonus points for that reference. All right. But hey, look, she put out a millionaire wealth tax. Bernie Sanders' wealth tax is actually better, but if we're going to go with something, at least let's go for something. And the one that's most likely to pass, of course, is probably Elizabeth Warren's, even though, again, I would prefer Bernie Sanders because he just puts out better policies. Nonetheless, let's do a millionaire's tax, or let's do something, okay? And then implement Bernie's Excessive CEO Pay Act to bring down the level of CEO to worker pay disparity, which in another video outlined how CEO to worker pay, the disparity is huge. It is enormous. It is worth 320 to 1. So, whereas back in the 60s, It used to be about 50 to 1. And so, again, in capitalism, there's always going to be some sort of wealth and income inequality. But it doesn't have to be this large. It doesn't have to be this big. It doesn't have to be this bad. We got to rein in the billionaires. Again, these are the same people that made additional money, billions of dollars, during a pandemic where basically everyone else is hurting. Okay? And so, again, you can't fix capitalism. There will always be these glaring inequalities. But again, with the right policies, it doesn't have to be as bad as it is, because what we're doing right now is 100% unsustainable and will lead to an absolute economic disaster. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.